Hi everybody, and thank you again for watching Gaffer and Gear. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at the Epos 600 from Kelvin. This is an RGBACL light engine with magnetic accessories, and it also has a very intuitive to use touchscreen user interface. Okay, let's start off with the regular disclaimers. Kelvin are not paying me any money to do this episode, and I have no financial agreements in place with them. However, they did send me the product for free, and I do get to keep it or sell it at the end of the review. So technically that is a paid product placement, and it is also a payment because I'm receiving goods. Now that is something you should be aware of when you're watching the review, because quite possibly at some sort of subconscious level, that might affect my opinion, so bear that in mind. Now, the next thing I want to point out is that this episode is indexed and chaptered because some of the testing that I do goes on for 3 to 5 minutes, and if you already know about this stuff, well, that's some of your life you're not going to get back, so just skip to the next chapter. Now, normally at this point in a review, I go into the pros and cons, and I talk about the cons first to get those out of the way. But in this case, I'm going to do a quick overview of the product, talk about the pros first, and then go to the cons, because I've really only got the one con. But in order to understand that con, in order to put it into perspective and understand why they designed the light with that con in place, we need to talk about the pros first, because one of the big pros for this light results in that con. One of the big pros for me with this is the user interface. It is a touch screen. So it enables you to do very complex adjustments extremely easy, because this is an RGBACL light engine. It has a lot of range of tunability. So I'm just going to use the HSI mode here, or the advanced HSI mode, to show you how easy this is to use. So we can change our color quite easily. So let's say we like that color. We want to desaturate it. Okay, so we can desaturate that quite easily. Now let's say we want to change the Kelvin at which we're desaturating to. Well, we can do that very easily over here. So we can warm and cool that color down now. All right, now that was very easy to do. We didn't have to use one knob to select a parameter, then use another knob to adjust that parameter, then go back to another knob, change a parameter again. Now we do have knobs on this for our fine tuning. So we can also do our adjustments from here in 0.1% adjustments. So I can adjust my hue in 0.1%, and I can also adjust my saturation in 0.1%. So that is incredible tunability that's made really simple. Now, in addition to that, we can also, on this same screen, we can select our color space for which we're working. So very, very complex operations can be done without having to go back into a menu system or without having to press buttons multiple times to select our parameters. Now let's get into the next pro, and this pro is, I think, one of the biggest defining attributes of this light, and one of the pros I really, really love. But unfortunately, this pro leads to the negative that I'm going to have later on in the episode. All right, so just let me explain what we've got here. We've got a small light source. Now, small light sources give you very hard shadows, which is something that I love working with. Now, the problem with small light sources giving you hard shadows is it's very hard to adjust your beam angles without affecting your shadow qualities. So, for example, if you get a Fresnel and you flood spot it, that changes the shadow characteristics. Or if you've got a point source like this and you want to spread it out more, you put some diffusion in front, that changes the size of the light source, and you've affected your shadow qualities. But these guys have a clever workaround if you want to adjust your beam angles but keep those sharp shadows, and that is removable diffusers and lenses. So this is our D90, that gives us a 90-degree beam spread. We also have this dome diffuser. Now this dome diffuser gives us a massive spread, but because it is still a small light source, we keep those sharp shadows. Now, in addition to the dome diffuser, we've also got a high performance lens. Now these are the different lenses and diffusers at a distance of 1 meter away from the wall. And this is outside the front of my house to give you an idea of the difference in a larger space. Now continuing through the pros, the build quality. The light, the stirrup and the control box are constructed using 6mm aluminium. Now this doesn't just add to strength and to the price tag, it also dramatically reduces the weight. So how can making a light out of metal reduce the weight compared to making it out of plastic? So let's take a look at the light. So you've got this little bit here, which is the LED. You've got a little bit of circuit board in the back, which is where everything connects. And the bulk of a modern LED light these days is the cooling system. It's all thermal dynamics. Now, because this thing is made of metal, we have a massive surface area of metal on both sides. Now, these guys are using that massive surface area of metal to help cool down the light. It's being utilized as a heat sink. Now, that reduces the amount of heat sink that you need inside and internal cooling. So not only is that reducing the weight, but it's also reducing the noise because the cooling system doesn't have to run as hard. In addition to this, they've also upped the IP rating. These now have an IP65 weather rating. The RGBACL light engine gives you a massive CCT range from 1700 Kelvin all the way up to 20,000 Kelvin, and you've got plenty of green and magenta correction, which is measured in delta UV. In addition to your CCT mode, you've also got an advanced HSI mode, an RGB mode, an XY coordinate mode, a gels library, and effects. With your HSI and RGB modes, you can select the color space in which you are working to make sure that you are post-production and camera compliant. And if you've got the latest firmware installed, in the settings, you can select a calibration to match the optical accessory that you're using to get maximum accuracy out of the light engine. The light also has built-in CRMX and is backed by a 3-year warranty. Now, in terms of things they've improved since I reviewed their 300, the DMX now has smoothing, which gives you a lot more cueability. Now let's cover things that I'd consider to be pros, but also cons as well. So neither pro nor con. All right, so this light uses pulse width modulation dimming. There's nothing wrong with that. Pulse width modulation dimming is the dimming system that enables us to get super fine control at our low ends, but it can result in flicker. Now, as far as I can tell with my limited resources for testing this, it looks like it's no more flicker-free or no less flicker-free than a good pulse width modulation engine. So I suspect that this would be flicker-free at, say, 800 to 1000 frames per second. But just in case it's not, these guys also have a high-speed flicker-free mode in the menu system. Now I'm going to switch the light over to the high-speed filming mode. Now, two things happen when you do this. It switches over to analog dimming and the fans fire up to full speed. Now, unlike other high-speed modes in other lights, this one does have one advantage. You can dim it all the way down to 0. So you've got your complete dimming range, whereas other lights usually stop dimming at about 40%. But here's the negative with this mode for me. It only works in the CCT mode. You can't use it in any of the color modes. Now, another possible negative for some people might be the fact that there's no direct battery mounts on the controller. So you can't run this directly off V-mount batteries, for example. If I'm running a light that's this firepower or higher, I just use a power station now. Not only is this cheaper than having loads of 26-volt batteries, but you're also not straining them, and you get a longer uninterrupted runtime. Now let's get into my list of cons, and the first con is to do with the CRMX. So every single command that I enter in on my CRMX controller is replicated on the screen here, which is a good thing. But here's the negative. The screen is not locked out from manual control. So I can do my adjustments here, and then somebody can come along and also make adjustments on the controller physically here. So what's the issue with this? Well, none of the adjustments that are done here are saved on my controller. So if, for example, we went to lunch and hit blackout and then came back, our set is now a different color. So that's a big negative for me, that you can't lock out the manual control when you're running off CRMX. Now, the next negative for me is to do with the stand mount for the controller. So it has this fancy pop-out spigot on the side, which then attaches to a super clamp or a Maffer clamp. Now, they have improved this since the 300. With the 300, if you're holding the stand here, the controller could slap into the stand, but that's not going to happen now. But here's my negative. The controller can still sway forwards and backwards. So let's say, for example, I pick this up to move it to another part of the set. the controller can swing and hit me in my nuts. Now let's get into what is pretty much my only real negative with this light, and that is the position of the LEDs or the position of the diffuser in relation to the position of the Bowen mount. Now I suspect this might have been done on purpose so that if you're using a diffuser like the Dome here, which sticks out a little bit more, and you have that on the Bowen mount and also have something like an optical accessory, you don't have glass smashing against glass. With this light, the LEDs are positioned way back from the Bowen mount, whereas most other lights have the light source forward of the Bowen mount. Even with a diffuser or lens attached, the light source is still a fair way back from where it normally is with Bowen mount lights. But much to my surprise, even though this is a long way back, it doesn't seem to affect softbox modifiers too greatly. Here, for example, I've got the Lantern 90 and I don't have a lens or diffuser in place, and it looks pretty evenly illuminated. However, I would recommend putting in the Dome diffuser. So this is the reflective area of a dome without any modifier in play, and this is with the Dome diffuser. So if you're one of those people that likes having a large pickup area in your dome to give you a bit more softness, this would definitely be worth doing. Now where this really is a problem is with hard light modifiers. Even with the diffuser dome attached, you've clearly got two light sources, because the diffuser dome is still sitting back from the reflector area. This results in very uneven light distribution when using it with reflectors, even with the diffuser dome in play. Now, if you're using the reflectors over large distance, it's not that big an issue. Now, where this really comes into play is if you're using a third-party Fresnel. The Fresnels were designed for the light source to be approximately here, and in this case, they're way back here. Being further away from the Fresnel reduces the beam angle of the light, so it's like having it spotted up. So here it has no internal lens or diffuser mounted in the Bowen section, and as you can see, it's very spotty despite the Fresnel being in flood. Without an internal diffuser or lens, the colour coming off the Fresnel is very uneven, and the shadows are terrible. Now let's try it with the diffuser in place behind the Fresnel. And now it's performing a lot better, but this is in full flood, which is meant to be 45 degrees. Barn door cuts have a lot of convexing because the light source is further back than it should be. Now let's circle back to the pros, and the one big pro that we haven't discussed is how much more color tunability you have with RGBACL light engines versus the color tunability of an RGBWW light engine. So here I've got the Epos 600 running against an RGBW light. Both lights are in their HSI mode and set to full saturated color, and both lights will be set to the same value and will be going right through the color range in 5-degree increments. Now, if something looks different to my eye than it does on camera, I'm going to take a note. For example here, the Epos 600 has a red that looks more like a blood orange to my eye, but my Rec 709 camera doesn't seem to show that. Now, in comparison to an RGBACL light engine, an RGB engine seems to have very minimal change from one color to the next. Now, just a reminder that this episode is indexed and chaptered because this test goes for another 3 minutes. All right, let's go through price and what you get for your money. So I've got two kits here. I've got the accessory kit. We'll go through this in a little while. And we've got the light kit here. Now, there's quite a bit of price variation on these. So I'm just going to go through what I found online. Okay, so the light kit, you're looking at a list price of $3,999 US, but it's currently got a sales price of $2,799 US. That's quite a bit of price difference. So let's see what's in the kit. Now the bag is very strongly constructed and has a lot of padding in it to make sure that your investment is secure. It has wheels at one end and a pull-out carry handle at the other. So this is what's in the bag. So you get the controller and power supply all built into one. We'll talk about that in more detail in a sec. You get a super clamp or mather clamp that connects the controller to your light stand if you wish to do that. You get a head lead which is 8 meters long. Now it's got a 90-degree angle at one end so that it doesn't catch on the stirrup. We'll go through that in a little bit of detail later on. You get what I think is the best Nutrix power cable that's ever come with a light. So what I love about this is it's got 2.5mm core. Now that is very overkill for a light that's only got 720 watts max power draw. But what I really like about this is it doesn't matter which light this ends up getting plugged into, I know it's not going to melt down. This cable can withstand any power that this connector was designed for. I just wish all manufacturers would do that instead of skimping and just supplying the minimum grade cable that you can get away with for the light. Okay, we also get a reflector, which they say is 62 degrees, but I don't really know about that. You'll understand why I say that when we get around to testing that. And you also get the light. Now, also sold with the light is the high performance lens. Okay, the other lenses are sold in the accessory kit or purchased separately. All right, so let's go over the light. So they've got an improved Bowen mount here that's just got this little flipper to unlock it. So that works way better than the button, which was hard to get to on the 300. On the back of the light, you've got your input for your head lead, and pretty much top and bottom is your fan vents. Now it's made out of 6mm aluminium, so it's very solidly built. Now on the bottom here, you've got screw connectors for your umbrella holders. So your umbrella holders are available separately or in the accessory kit. We'll get to that in a sec. Now in the side of the light, it has a machined hole for your safety rigging point, and it does have a detachable stirrup. Now in terms of being able to remove it from the stirrup, at this point, I can't really see any point in being able to do this because there are no rigging points on the light. All the rigging points are on the stirrup. I mean, you do have the handle that you could possibly Cardellini clamp to, but you know, the weight's all forward of that, so I don't think that's a good idea. But it does have a nice, easy automatic connection when you put the light back on. I suspect that the reason they've got the detachable stirrup is possibly into the future they're going to have other modifiers that have their own stirrups that the light attaches to the back of. The stirrup has a combination baby pin, junior pin mount, and on the side of the stirrup you've got a threading point that you can put the locker on if you're using the light on a combo stand. It has a disc brake locking system with a ratchet handle. It displays the angle at which the light is tilted, and the light can rotate a full 360 degrees in the stirrup, even with the head lead attached. Now let's take a look at the controller, and it's made from the same 6mm aluminium that the lamp head is. It's got a rubber carry handle, a pop-out spigot on the one side for mounting to your light stand. On the back of the unit, you've got your power button, and every input and output you could possibly want. You've got a USB-C input, a local area network connection, DMX in and out. You've got power in and through, a 48-volt DC inlet, and you've got your output for the head lead connector. Now in today's episode, I'm not going to go through all of the modes and the menu system because it's pretty much identical to the Epos 300. So you can watch that in the previous review I did on that one. But I will go through the CCT mode just to give you some idea of just how simple this user interface is to interact with. The left knob adjusts your brightness in 0.1% increments. The quicker you move the knob, the more radical your adjustments are. You can also make adjustments by touching the touchscreen. The center knob adjusts your CCT values. You can adjust in 20 Kelvin increments. You can also do rapid adjustment. Again, you can use the touchscreen. And the touchscreen also has quick setting icons. The right knob adjusts your green and magenta tint. At any time you can press the button to go back to a neutral value. You can also adjust your green and magenta tint on the touchscreen. Now the green and magenta tint is in delta UV increments, but just something to point out here. 0.007 is 0.0070. So the maximum adjustment, it's 0.0270. Now from this page, you can also adjust your output between constant and maximum output, and you can also select your high-speed filming mode from here, so you don't have to go into the menu systems. You can also save presets, and you can also load a preset if you have one saved. Now from this page in the top right hand corner, you've got your menu so that you can quickly access any changes you might need to do in the system. Now let's take a look at the accessory kit, and this has a list price of $346 US, but I've seen it selling for as low as $239 US. In the kit you get the Diffuser Dome, you get the medium Diffuser D90, and you get these umbrella mounts, which screw into the bottom of the light. Now you can adjust your position left to right before locking it into its final position. Now let's have a look at how the light performs with no Bowen mount modifier and no diffuser or lens mounted. Now from a distance without the light moving, it does look like quite an even distribution of light and colour. But upon closer inspection, you can definitely see that is not the case. Now here the light's at a distance of about 2 meters away from the wall. So where this would come in handy is if you were, say, trying to light up a 6x6 or an 8x8 diffuser. Without having that additional lens or diffuser in play, you're not reducing your light level. Now the characteristics do change depending on the CCT or the colour that you dial in. Primary red looks very even. However, with green, you can definitely see the pattern of the array and the reflectors coming into play. The same applies with blue, but it's nowhere near as bad as it was with the green. And depending upon the distance from the light, you've either got very sharp shadows or multiple coloured shadows. Now, if you're lighting a larger area from a distance, a lot of these aberrations do not come into play. In fact, it seems pretty good. Now let's take a look with the supplied Bowen mount reflector with no glass modifiers in play. Now we've got multiple rings of light and very uneven distribution of colour. However, this would come in handy if you were trying to boost your light levels and maybe put it through a diffusion frame. Now the results are not the same if you change the CCT or the colour. The results are way more uneven with a lower CCT dialed in. Primary red doesn't look too bad. Green is very uneven. And blue is also uneven, but nowhere near as bad as green. The shadow qualities are what you would expect from a faceted dish. And if you are using this to light up a large area, it is quite hot in the centre, but a lot of the other issues disappear. Now let's take a look with the D90 medium diffuser. And all of our issues to do with unevenness of beam and unevenness of color distribution have now gone. And I'm also happy to report that regardless of your CCT or color dialed in, the characteristics seem to be the same. And we've got nice sharp shadows. And this is how it performs lighting up a large area. We've got plenty of distribution, but we're still keeping our nice crisp shadows. Now let's take a look at the D90 diffuser in combination with the supplied reflector. And the D90 diffuser does remove the color fraying issues. But because it is positioned in the mount of the reflector and not where the reflector is, this results in some hot spots and rings of shadows and light. Now the results are slightly different if you dial in a lower CCT. So if you were looking to light something close evenly with this combination, you'd be in for a bit of disappointment. But it would still be a handy combination if you're lighting up, say, a 4x4 diffuser. Now, just to give you an idea of the light distribution, I've taken some readings across the beam. Now we've got multiple shadows like you get off a faceted dish, but they're all the same color thanks to the diffuser. Now if you're lighting up a large area, there is a noticeable hot spot in the center of the beam, but the drop off towards the edge of the beam is much smoother with the D90 diffuser in play. Now let's take a look with the high performance lens. Now for this combination of tests, I've decided to put a light stand in the center just to check that the shadows aren't changing towards the edge of the beam, and I'm happy to report that it doesn't. Now in terms of high performance, we've gained about 0.2 of an f-stop compared to the D90 diffuser. So I'm guessing that's the high performance. Now the results seem to be the same regardless of the CCT that you dial in. Now the light distribution on red looks pretty even. But green and blue are not as even. But in all honesty, I can only see it because I'm really looking for it. And the high performance lens still gives us very sharp shadows. Now if you're using this to light a large area, it'll give you that little bit more light level, but still give you the sharp shadows that you desire. Now let's have a look at the high performance lens in combination with the supplied reflector. And once again, because the high performance lens is in the neck or the mounting section of the reflector and not forwards of the Bowen mount like on other lights, you get an uneven distribution of light if you're using this fairly close, like 2 to 3 meters. And the results seem to be the same regardless of the CCT or color that you dial in. And the shadows are what you would expect from a faceted reflector. Now in terms of lighting a large area, you've still got that hotspot. Now let's take a look at the Diffuser Dome, and I really am a huge fan of this concept. If you've got a background in a small room that you need to smash with an even distribution of light, then this is going to do a great job. Now just something to note with my brightness readings here. At 1 meter, the light is brighter at 5600 Kelvin than it is at 3200 Kelvin, but it's the opposite at 3 meters. Now I've triple and quadruple checked these readings and they're correct. Now the quality of light seems to be the same regardless of the CCT or color that you dial in. And for a point light source, we've still got our crisp shadows. Now for me, where this could creatively be a big hero is it can light up a large area in much the same way as you could do with a light going through a 4x4 diffusion frame. But we still have our hard shadows. Now let's have a look at the diffusion dome in combination with the reflector. And in terms of getting quality optics out of the reflector, this is the best combination I think you're going to get. You've still got the hot spot, but it's not as intense, and you've got slightly less rings of light than you had before. And the characteristics seem to be largely the same, regardless of the CCT or color that you dial in. Now all of these shots were taken with the light at a distance of 2 meters away from the wall. Now this is at 3 meters. And I'm checking the evenness of the beam with the light 3 meters away. And of course, it's a faceted reflector, so we get multiple shadows. Now, if you're using this to light up a larger area, the hotspot is less of an issue, and the dome also helps the drop off towards the edges. Now into the DMX testing. If you're in a bit of a hurry, I'm just going to give you a quick summary so you can skip this 6 minutes of testing. If you're doing a fade up and fade down from black, the Epos 600 does that fairly well. If you're doing a transition from one CCT to another, it also does that very well. However, if you're doing a transition from a CCT to a color hue, this can shimmer along the way. The Kelvin Epos 600 is receiving its commands via its internal CRMX receiver. It is set to an 8-bit CCT HSI crossover profile, its dimmer is set to linear, it is set to maximum output not constant, and it has no smoothing options. To give you something to compare it to, I've blown the dust off a SkyPanel S60C, which is also running off an 8-bit CCT HSI crossover profile, and also has its dimmer set to linear. Now the SkyPanels may be very old, but they've still got some of the best DMX smoothing that I've come across. Both lights are receiving their commands at the same time. Let's start off with instant cues to black. Now let's take a look at some half-second cues. Now for some 1-second cues. Now for some 2.5-second cues. And now for some 5-second cues. Now let's have a look at some CCT changeovers between 5600 Kelvin and 3200 Kelvin, starting with instant changeovers. Now for some half-second changeovers. Now for some 1-second changeovers. Now for some 2.5-second changeovers. And now for some 5-second changeovers. Now for some changeovers between a CCT and a colour hue, starting with instant changeovers. Now for some half-second cues. Now for some 1-second cues. Now for some 2.5-second cues. And now for some 5-second cues. Now with a light like this, the devil is in the details. So let's start going over all of the test data I've collected, starting off with the AC power draw. The maximum power recorded over several days of testing was 674.3 watt. At 3200 Kelvin, I recorded 659 watt, and at 5600 Kelvin, I recorded 667.7 watt. And the power factor unity scores are very good, which is important if you're trying to run a light like this off an inverter battery system like an EcoFlow. Now let's take a look at the dimming characteristics. And according to my frequency meter, this light is running at roughly 20 kHz. Now I've taken a photo with a shutter set at 1/15,500th, which is the fastest shutter I could get with the light available. And there is some flicker here, but going off my experience, and I don't really have anything else to go off with this, I think this light would be high-speed flicker-free up to around about 1,000 frames per second, but don't sue me if it's not. Now don't forget that we've also got the high-speed mode, which is entirely flicker-free, but only works in CCT. All of the following test results are taken in the pulse width modulation dimming mode. These are the results for 3200 Kelvin, and I've taken readings at 100%, 75%, 50%, 25%, 10%, 5%, 1%, and 0.1%. The CCT is amazingly accurate all the way through the entire dimming range. The TM30 color render score does drop as you dim the light, but is still very decent even at 0.1%. Green magenta shift, white point accuracy, or delta UV is very impressive across the entire dimming range. But have a look at the bottom row, 0.1%. This is very impressive. Now let's take a look at the results for 5600 Kelvin. The CCT is excellent all the way down to 10%, and below 10% it is still very good. There is a little bit of variation in the TM30 color render scores, and the white point placement, delta UV, or green and magenta shift is excellent all the way down to 10%. Below 10% there is a bit of variation, but you'd really have to be looking for it. Now let's take a look at the CCT accuracies. Now this light is tunable in 20 Kelvin increments, but I've taken the reading at 100 Kelvin increments. And as you can see, the CCT value is higher than the target value, but it is very accurate. Now let's take a look at the TM30 color render scores. Between 1700 Kelvin and 2100 Kelvin, the scores rapidly increase from 89 to 95. Here are the scores from 2200 Kelvin all the way up to 7000 Kelvin, where I stopped taking readings at 100 Kelvin increments. The highest score is a 97 and the lowest score is a 93. Now let's take a look at the delta UV or white point placement. And this light only follows the one track. From 1700 Kelvin to 2800 Kelvin, the light tracks from minus 0.0019 delta UV up to plus 0.0001 delta UV. If I had to give this section an average, it would be minus 0.0009. Here are the averages for 1700 Kelvin all the way up to 7000 Kelvin, taken at 100 Kelvin increments. And as you can see, the light tracks very faithfully to the Planckian curve. Now here's a snapshot of our CCTs between 8000 Kelvin to 20,000 Kelvin, taken in 1000 Kelvin increments. And some of them are very accurate. Let's take a closer look at some of the CCTs now, starting off with the lowest CCT that we can dial in. When I dialed in 1700 Kelvin, I got 1710. The TN30 color vector results were 89% average color accuracy with an average 106% color saturation. With the CRI scores, R8, R9 and R12 were all below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of minus 0.0019, which would make the light magenta at this point to about 2/3 of a 1/8 correction gel. When I dialed in 2500 Kelvin, I got 2562. The TN30 color render results were 97% average color accuracy with an average 103% color saturation. All of the CRI scores are plus 90. The spectrum distribution looks really nice. And the white point came in with a delta UV of minus 0.0008, which technically means the light has a little bit of magenta shift in it, but it would be imperceivable. When I dialed in 3200 Kelvin, I got 3257 with an SSI score of 88. The TN30 color testing results were 96% average color accuracy with an average 101% color saturation. All of the CRI scores are plus 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point is almost perfect with a delta UV of minus 0.0002. When I dialed in 4400 Kelvin, I got 4368. The TN30 color testing results were 95% average color accuracy with an average 100% color saturation. With the CRI scores, R12 was below 90. And everything else is plus 96. The spectrum distribution is superb, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0012. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin, I got 5605 with an SSI score of 76. The TN30 color testing results were 94% average color accuracy with an average 101% color saturation. With the CRI scores, only R12 is below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point came in with a delta UV of plus 0.0010. So if you're working to the black body or Planckian curve, this will be slightly green to about the equivalent of 1/3 of a 1/8 correction gel. And if you're working to the daylight curve, then the light will be magenta to about 2/3 of a 1/8 correction gel. When I dialed in 10,000 Kelvin, I got a surprisingly accurate 10,023. The TN30 color testing results were 91% average color accuracy with an average 100% color saturation. With the CRI scores, R9, R12 and R15 are all below 90. This is the spectrum distribution, and the white point is still tracking to the curves with a delta UV of plus 0.0019. When I dialed in the top CCT of 20,000, I got a surprisingly accurate 20,166. 20,000 Kelvin is outside the range of a TN30 color vector test. With the CRI scores, R9, R10, R12 and R15 are all below 90, but these CRI scores are really good for 20,000 Kelvin. Here is the spectrum distribution, and the white point is still tracking to the Planckian and daylight curves with a delta UV of plus 0.0018. Now let's take a look at the accuracy of our color vectors. Red, which should be 0 degrees, came in at 3 degrees. Green, or 120 degrees, came in smack on at 120. Blue was smack on at 240. When I dialed in 60 degrees or yellow, I got 62. But it does look a bit green by eye, so I'd recommend dialing in somewhere between 37 and 42. Cyan, which should be 180 degrees, came in at 189, and magenta, which should be 300 degrees, came in at 293. Now, just for my closing thoughts, this light has some pretty amazing color science, and it has the user interface to really enable you to grab all of those colors and nuances. But here's the problem for me. Whilst this light does give me an amazing amount of paints to paint with, I've only got about 2/3 of my paint brushes. All right, you've got these things which are very clever and very genius. You've got all the softbox modifiers that Bowen mount can offer, including softboxes specifically made by DOP Choice to go with this light, but without a dedicated Fresnel, without a dedicated projector mount, I really am missing 1/3 of my paint brushes that I need to paint my set. So hurry up and get some of those modifiers out, and I think you will take the world by storm with your products.